When we think about our careers, we usually measure them in years, right? A straight line from point A to point B. But what if there was another way to look at it? A method to frame your professional journey not just by how long you've been working, but by the actual momentum you're building. Well, today we're diving into this really interesting concept from our source material called the Avengers Ratio, a formula that's designed to do exactly that. The source material puts it this way: an alternate path to glory through a specific industrial ratio. Now, I know what you're thinking. Path to glory sounds a little over the top for a resume, for sure, but the idea behind it is actually pretty powerful. It's suggesting there's a hidden strategy, a way to totally reframe your career story. So that's the big question, isn't it? What in the world is this ratio? And how is some math formula supposed to make your CV more impressive to a hiring manager? Let's dig in and find out. Okay, to get our heads around the ratio, we've got to break it down into its key components first. So section 1, let's meet the variables. First up, we have P. Now, the source defines this as the entrance exam score you got for your very first job. And that exam could be anything really: a certification, a coding challenge, some kind of assessment. The important thing is to think of P as your starting point. It's the number that kicks off your whole professional journey. Next, we've got Q. This is the score from the entrance exam at your second job, Company B. The source material gets a little fuzzy here, sometimes linking Q to how long you stayed at your first job, but for this formula, we're going to stick to its main definition. Q is your next big achievement score. And finally, there's R. Now, this one's different. It's not a score from your past, it's a target for your future. The source calls it a self-assigned score for your next big thing, like a major project or a new role. So R is basically the value you're promising you can deliver next. Now, here's the number one rule, and it's absolutely critical: chronology. These variables have to go in order. You can't mix them up. It has to be P, then Q, then R. According to the source, that strict timeline is the only thing that makes this formula a valid way to map out your career's momentum. All right, so we have our variables. Now let's see how they fit together. On to section 2, the Avengers Ratio. So the formula is a ratio, basically a fraction. On the top, you've got R minus Q. Think of that as the jump in performance you're aiming for in the future. And on the bottom, you have Q minus P. That's the growth you've already proven between your first and second gigs. It's really just a simple comparison: your projected growth versus your proven growth. And what does this ratio of future to past growth need to equal? Well, according to this whole framework, the magic number is always 8. That's the constant. That's the target you're aiming for to keep your career trajectory perfectly balanced. Now, why 8? The source doesn't really say, but it presents it as the absolute key to making the whole system work. Okay, so having the ratio is interesting, but the real power here comes when we rearrange it a little. In section 3, we're going to unlock the equation and turn this thing from a simple ratio into a powerful predictive tool. Don't worry, the algebra here is super simple. All we're doing is moving things around to solve for R, that future target score we talked about. And when you do that, you end up with a much more direct and, frankly, more useful formula. And here it is: R equals 9Q minus 8P. This changes everything. It turns the ratio into a tool for prediction. Once you know your P and Q scores from your first 2 jobs, you can literally calculate the exact target R you need to aim for to keep that ideal career momentum going. So the theory is pretty cool, right? But let's make it a bit more real. In section 4, we're going to plug in some actual numbers and put this ratio into action. So how does this actually play out? Let's look at 2 different scenarios. What if your first 2 scores are kind of close together? And then, what if they're a bit further apart? How does that initial gap change the target score R that you need to be shooting for? Okay, let's look at the numbers. In this original scenario, the gap between P and Q is just 6 points. That means you need an R score of 200. But look at the scaled up scenario. The gap widens to 10 points. To keep that same ratio of 8, your target score R has to leap all the way up to 250. This chart really shows you that effect visually. The source material calls this sensitivity. It means that even a small increase in the gap between your first 2 scores, like going from 6 points to 10, demands a much, much bigger jump in your target score to keep that perfect balance of 8. So we've looked at the variables, we've seen the formula, we've run through an example. In our final section, let's just step back and figure out what all of this really means for you.
So what's the big takeaway from that final formula? R equals 9Q minus 8P? Well, it shows that your most recent performance is weighted really, really heavily. Your second score, Q, has 9 times the positive impact. At the same time, your starting score, P, acts like an anchor, pulling the number back down and grounding the whole calculation in your history. It's a system that basically says, yeah, what you did recently matters most, but we haven't forgotten where you started.
And that really brings us to the final thought here. This whole framework kind of challenges you to see your career in a new light. Is your professional life just a fixed series of events on a timeline? Or could it be more like a dynamic equation where your next move is actually a variable that you can strategically solve for? Definitely something to think about.